Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And as you know, on Sundays we do Torah Temimah, and we are doing the Genesis. We're doing it, as they say, Keseder. We started off with chapter 1:1. We're actually made it to chapter 2. And in fact, we're on verse 7 of chapter 2. So the verse itself says, "Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam." The Lord God formed man, afar min ha'adamah, dust from the earth. Vayipach ba'apo, and he blew into his nostrils nishmat chayim, the breath of life. Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and the human being became a living soul. Okay. And we're into the Torah Temimah. Vayitzer. So, Tanya. So there's an early source. We know that the word Tanya is a technical term to indicate a source that would be prior to the year 200. It's contemporaneous with the Mishnah. The Mishnah came out in the year 200. And so this is sources that precede that year, but not found in the Mishnah itself, right? That would, it's none. It would say it's none if it meant that it was found in the Mishnah. So this is from outside the Mishnah, which you may have heard the term is called baraita. Baraita means outside in Aramaic. My dichtiv vayitzer b'shnei yudin. In other words, why is this word vayitzer, as you can see, with two yuds? Why does it have two of the letter yuds? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. So there, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, son of Pazi, has one interpretation. The Amar, he used to say, "Oi li mi yotzri, woe to me from my creator. Oi li mi yitzri." Look at that. So yitzer. So woe to me from my inclinations. So of course in Hebrew, there's a beautiful pun involved here. So there's yotzri, that yud, and yitzri, my inclination. Another yud there. Let's take a look at the footnote here. Ritzono lomar. So what he is trying to say is, oily, woe to me, mi yotzri, from my creator, im eser ritzon yitzri, if I were to follow the desire of my inclination. For oily mi yitzri, and woe to me from my inclination, shemitzareni la'avor al ritzon yotzri, which afflicts me in other words, it tempts me to transgress the will of my creator. So he's talking about these two senses that are at battle within him. And it appears, deromez lamashi katuv b'torat kohanim, that he's alluding to what is written in the Sifra, which is a Tanaitic commentary on the book of Leviticus. Sof Perek Kedoshim, at the end of Parsha Kedoshim, Shelo Yomar Adam, that a person shouldn't say, Ifshi lechol basar chazir. I don't want to eat the flesh of a pig. I don't want to eat pork. Ifshi lavo le'erva. I don't have any desire to involve myself in immorality. Ela ifshi. But I actually want this. I desire these things. The ifshi. And I desire the one thing and I desire the other thing, or it could mean I want it a lot. But what can I do? Va'avisha b'shamayim, because my Father in heaven, Kazar halai, has commanded me. In other words, okay, interesting, right? That the reason I don't do these things isn't the reason I don't eat pork and the reason I don't engage in immorality isn't because I have no desire for it. The fact is, I have great desire for it, but I can't do it because my Father in heaven tells me I'm not allowed to do it. Ye'uyanshan, check it out. V'hachanami, okay, and it's possible here. Hakavana shirashai adam lomar, right? And it is permissible that the intention is that it is permissible for a person to say oili mi yitzri, to say oive from my desires, sheyesh li tsar mimenu, because it's troubling me, it's bothering the you know what out of me. And therefore, even despite the fact that he's so troubled by this, he overcomes it, mitgaber alav. He overcomes these desires, meruba zechuto. His merit is very, very great. So, this, of course, this statement of Shimon ben Pazi is a fairly famous statement, and of course, it actually, of course, describes reality. And of course, I suppose would Freud say the ego, the superego and the id, right? So that's the one interpretation of why two yuds in this. And it's in some ways a really beautiful and fairly well-known interpretation. Onwards. Inami. Yes, David.
But okay, but what does that have to do with breathing life? Breathing life into people, right? So or is it just the point about the two yuds happen to be in the phrase itself? Yeah, I'm just asking.
Okay, so the breathing life is the second half of the statement. The first part of it is the formation, right? It's the formation of the human being out of the dust of the earth.
Right.
In other words, it's our physical form, and in other words, and it's saying that this is part of, that God has created us in this way, that we have this internal struggle between our desires and the mitzvot.
Ah, okay. Okay, got it. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And the idea is that we shouldn't feel guilty in the sense of not having these, that we shouldn't be even having these desires. Of course, you don't want to pour gasoline on the desires, but on the other hand, it's being truthful with oneself and not lying to oneself and admitting that one has these things and that the reason one isn't doing these things isn't because it's natural. Remember, what I've said before, that the subtext of the Torah is doing what doesn't come naturally. And it's natural to have these feelings, but it's even greater as a human being to be able to overcome these feelings. It's a great thing. It's an act of bravery. And of course, we realize again, these things have to be done in a careful way and being able, I like to sometimes say that we have to learn to dance with these feelings, right? Because if you try to crush them, generally they spring back in negative kinds of ways. Um, and you hear about ministers doing, or very religious people doing things that are quite immoral and what have you, because they haven't been able to work out a way in which to live with who we are and yet overcome things that would lead us to do immoral, to behave immorally. And it's part of gaining merit, gaining significance, gaining a sense of self-worth, etc. So Inami, or one could say that the reason there are these two yuds in Yitzri, and it is a remez, David, meaning it's an illusion. We're not trying to sing this is not pshat that we're dealing with. We are dealing with sort of subtle hints in the Torah itself. Excuse me one moment. Thank you. All right. Keder Rabbi Yirmiyahu ben Elazar. We could go with the interpretation of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, son of Elazar, right? Rabbi Jeremiah, son of Elazar, the Amar, who said, Du partsufin bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'adam harishon. Two faces, there's dual faces, the Holy One, blessed be He, created in the first man. Okay, in that first man, that basically, in other words, he was created as a hermaphrodite. Shneemar, as it says in Psalm 139, Achor v'kedem sartani, you formed me before and after. And we'll look at the commentary there. And this is from Tractate Brachot. And we're looking at commentary number 22. So Kaf Bet, let's find it. Here it is. Ritzono Lomar. So what he is trying to say is Shnei Partsufei Panim, right? Two faces. Echad milafanav, one facing on the one side in the front, ve'echad milacharav, and one on the rear, on the back side, facing backwards. Ve'chalko l'shnayim, and what God did was He divided that first man into two. Ume'echad nivra Chava, and from one of those two sides He created Eve. And check out further below, in other words, as we keep going, the Pasuk Kaf Bet in verse 22, Vayivin Hashim Elohim et Hatzela, where it says the Lord God built up, right? Something like that, the Tsela. And the word Tsela can mean rib, but we also know that it can mean side. And we were discussing the sanctuary, the Mishkan, and we mentioned that the word Tsela is used there to mean the side of the Mishkan. Going on. Vayitzer. So another comment on these. My dichtiv, again, why is it written Yitzer Bishnei Yodim? Why two Yods in Vayitzer? Amar Rabbi Zaira, so a new interpreter, Rabbi Zaira, B'Shem Rav Huna, in the name of Rav Huna, Remez L'Shtei Yetzirot, right? It refers to two formations. Yetzira L'Shiva, a formation of seven, V'Yetzira L'Tish'a, and a formation of 9. And this is from the Yerushalmi, the Tractate Yerushalmi. And what it's talking about is a gestation period of 7 months and a gestation period of 9 months. And it appears that either back then or perhaps it's still true medically these days, there were pregnancies that lasted 7 months and they weren't considered preemies. They were successful pregnancies as well as the normal 9-month pregnancy. But that's what he's referring to. That in the formation of the child, even now, this is what takes place. These two different formations. Let's take a look. Pirush, HaPnei Moshe. So the Pnei Moshe it's literally a commentary, meaning the face of Moses, is the earliest known commentary on the entire Jerusalem Talmud, composed in the 18th century by Rabbi Moshe Margalit. So if you're not aware of this already, of course, that is the Talmud Bavli, which is the Talmud, when people refer to the Talmud, that's what they're referring to. This is the Talmud that was based for the most part on the discussions in the academies in Babylonia. But there's also a Talmud Yerushalmi, which, if I'm not mistaken, was actually created before, came into existence before that, which represents the discussions that took place in the land of Israel. And the thing is that there's a Rashi commentary on the Talmud Bavli, and it really opens up. It's like a major key to unlocking an understanding of the Talmud Bavli. There is no Rashi on the Talmud Yerushalmi. So it's a much more difficult book to get into and to understand than the Talmud Bavli, which is a pretty awesome book itself. But the Yerushalmi was pretty much unlocked for many, many years. And even so, the commentaries, Rashi shows his genius because there are no commentaries, even though there are, as you see, the Pnei Moshe, which can match Rashi's ability to explain things in a brief kind of way, and yet in a profound way. At any rate, Torah Temimah is quoting Pnei Moshe, Kevan de Yetzirat Adam Atida Liyot Kain, since the formation of the human being was going to be this way in the future, Ramaz la Hashta. There is a suggestion of this now here. And this is despite the fact that when it came to the formation of Adam, right, the very first human being, this 9 month or 7 month issue, there was no one, of course, there was no mother for Adam. He didn't have anyone who became pregnant, right? So nevertheless, it still is put here because of the future. Ad kan lashono, and this is the end of his quote. So Torah Temimah is quoting the Pnei Moshe here. Going on. Afar min ha'adamah, right? Dust from the earth. Amar Rabbi Yudan ben Pazi. So this is Rabbi Yudan ben Pazi. We had Shimon ben Pazi, but now we've got Rabbi Yudan ben Pazi. Malo tarvad echad. He took a spoonful, right, afar of dust. Natal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, took mimakom hamizbeach, from the area where the altar in the temple was to be built. Uvara vo et hadam, and with that spoonful he created the first human being, or human beings. So, of course, this is a deeply metaphoric statement here that it's suggesting, very suggestive. Here we go. Tarvad. First of all, the tarvad is milah yavanit. He says tarvad is actually a Greek word, upirusha be'ivrit kaf, and its Hebrew meaning is a spoon. Okay, so let's keep going. Did we get to the end of the? No. Okay. Hada hu dichtiv, how do we know this? Vayitzer Hashem Elohim et Adam afar min ha'adamah, because it says the Lord God formed man, dust from the earth, ha'adamah. So notice, by the way, we're going to see the significance of using the definite article here, meaning it's referring to some specific earth. Uktiv, and elsewhere, Sof Parshat Yitro, at the end of Parsha Yitro, where the Ten Commandments are given, of course, it says there, Mizbach Adama Ta'aseli, you shall make me a altar of earth. There's the word Adama here. So we've got Ha-Adama, the earth, and here it's just talking about earth. And so the suggestion is that when it says the earth here, it's referring to this Adama, according to this interpretation, is how they're taking it as an allusion. Ma Adama she'namar lahalan mizbeach, just as the reference of Adama, of earth, later on refers to the altar. Af Adama shebekan mizbeach. So, in referring to Adama here, it also is referring to the altar. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said the Holy One, blessed be He, or thought the Holy One, blessed be He, Halavai Yivra mimakom hazmizbeach. Would it be, right, let it be that he is created from the place of the altar, vatahelo amidah, so that he has standing, that he'll have endurance. And we'll see in a second what the implication is of that. Give me one So let's take a look. So it would appear that an explanation is this of this Alpi Mashi Yitba'er Im Yetz Hashem is based on what will become clear, God willing, Lefanenu, ahead of us, but Parshat Ha'azinu, that's way, of course, at the end of the Torah, in the Parsha Ha'azinu, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, the Pasuk, in the verse that says, Vechiper Admato Amo, and his land will atone for his people, right? So the Kol HaKavur, the Eretz Israel, and there it says that anyone who's buried in the land of Israel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mechaper lo al avonotav, the Holy One, blessed be He, atones him for his sins, for his iniquities. He is granted atonement. And he gives another reference here, the Iyen Bereshit Rabbah, and check out Bereshit Rabbah, Vayechi, in the Parsha of Vayechi, that's the end of the book of Genesis, Perek Tzadik Vav, in chapter 96. So here we go. V'ra'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Holy One, blessed be He, saw, Ki atid Adam Rishon lachto. He saw that in the first man, that Adam would sin. He knew ahead of time he was going to sin. Hikdim refuah leyased bivriat ufo. So he already created. He thought ahead and went ahead and created a medicine, literally, right, to establish the creation of his body, me'afar, from the earth. Eretz Yisrael, from the earth of the land of Israel. Kedei sheyitkaper lo, in order that he would be able to gain atonement. Now, I think there's something quite profound being stated here in terms of rabbinic, you might call it rabbinic psychology, and how we're to understand the nature of humanity. And that is that we know that as human beings, we are flawed. We are flawed. But it doesn't mean we're hopeless. It means that because we believe in that we were created through a divine and benevolent agency, that God wanted so much to give us this opportunity to be able to gain atonement, to be able to find forgiveness in ourselves for what we do, if we in fact try to correct the mistakes we make. And the truth is that I wonder to myself if sometimes when people really get themselves into trouble is because that deep, deep, deep down in themselves, they feel they're hopeless. And that hopelessness actually is a great reason why people do terrible things, because they feel it doesn't make any difference. And here this is saying you always have that opportunity, that there's always, no matter what, a chance for you to find a way to atone. V'acharei sheyadua sheyesod kedushat Eretz Yisrael, and because it is known that the the establishment or the foundation of the holiness, right, of the land of Israel, umakom hamikdash, right, that in other words, the very basis of the land of Israel's holiness is the location of the temple, the Yisod Kedushat HaMikdash, and the basis of the holiness of the temple, Hu HaMizbech Shemechaper, is the altar which allows us to atone. Kamo shekatuv Ma Mizbech Mechaper, it states, it says, just as the altar atones, that's a statement that it makes. V'chein meforash mima'amaram, and likewise it's explained, right? It becomes clarified from statements made of the rabbis. Kol hakavur be'eretz Yisrael. This is from Ketubot, Tractate Ketubot, page 111a. Kol hakavur be'eretz Israel, anyone who's buried in the land of Israel, ki'ilu kavur tachat hamizbeach. Even if he's buried anywhere in the land of Israel, it's as if he is buried underneath the altar. And again, very symbolic, right? V'lachen tafas hadoresh, and for that reason, the interpreter here grabs onto, right? He understands how these principles, shinatal ha'afar mimakom hamizbeach, that God took earth from the location of the altar, umasmich ze al diuk halashon min ha'adama, and he bases this he connects this to the point that he makes where the language of the verse says min ha'adama, where it talks about the earth. Dahava leilomar, because the verse really could have simply said that God took afar min adama, right? It didn't have to say ha'adama. In other words, and we usually say, dust of earth. It could have been, that's what it could have said. And because it says dust of the earth, it's talking about, as I said, definite article, velashon min ha'adama, and this expression min ha'adama, from the earth. Mashma, it implies ha'adama ha'meyuchedet. It's talking about some specific earth. O makom hameyuchad sheba'adama, or a specific place that is in the earth. Mitzayen ze l'ramez, and so he takes note of this to allude v'siman. Okay, umitzayen ze l'remez v'siman. Sorry, and he considers this expression, right, this particular way of doing it, as a hint and a sign al shivui hamilot hat adama, on the connection, right, the similarity of the words Adama, earth, Shebekan Uva Mizbeach, which is here and also happens to be regarding the altar. Ubiur halashon vatahelo amida, and as far as explaining the expression that he should have amida, remember this commentary ended with that human beings should have some standing, right? Or endurance. Yesh lefaresh, we can understand that expression, pilashon ha-pasuk petilim, based on the language of a verse in Psalms, Psalm 130. Im avonot tishmor, were you to guard iniquities, tishmor, if the Lord were to hold on to iniquities or look into iniquities deeply, something like that, Adonai mi yamod, O Lord, who can stand? Right. So, excuse me. This is, that we would never be able to face up if we knew, or if God were to judge us on the basis of all our faults, right? And all our failures and all our rebellious acts or laziness or anything, we would have no hope, right? Who could stand in the face of this? And we will have to stop here and pick this up next week as he continues.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Okay, I might have missed something because I had to step out for a second.
Yes.
They didn't ever discuss that the double yud could mean two Yeitzers? The two
Yes.
Yeitzers?
He did.
Did I miss that?
You did. It was the very first commentary where he
Gotcha.
says, Oy leyitzri, oy leyotzri.
Gotcha.
Where he says, woe to my, yes.
Right.
It did not, okay, to be fair.
It didn't say Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov.
No, it did not. No, it did not. It did not state it explicitly in the way you just said. Yes, that's
right. But
right.
It's implied.
It certainly is. It certainly.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank
because
you.
that makes the most sense to me anyway.
Right.
Because
Okay.
because it's later on they said something about God knows he's going to sin because if you
right.
you give us both, we got the opportunity.
Yeah. Right. Okay.